This is a special presentation brought to you by the Daf Map, based on one of the lectures given by HaRav Yehonasan Berger Shlita. Please check out our other videos and shiurim at www.thedafmap.com.
Today's shiur begins 3 lines from the bottom of Daf Nun Zayin. Please be aware that it's quite likely in the course of today's shiur for Daf Nun Ches, we're going to spill over beyond the Daf Yomi pace and include Daf Nun Tes Omid Aleph. The reason for that is that we will be in the middle of a discussion when we reach Daf Nun Ches Omid Beis, and it would not be to our advantage to stop it in the middle. So, that having been said, we note the Gemara 3 lines from the bottom of Nun Zayin Omid Beis, where we begin today's shiur. On the side of our Gemara, we have a nosei/mivneh heading, a topic heading with a structural note. The diamond marking, one of our series markings, will appear, and it indicates Shnei Makoros, 2 sources, 2 Tanaic sources, Shehuva'u b'nisayon Lomar, they're presented in the Gemara in an attempt to say, Ta'akofas kol harosh havi hakofa, hino machlokes tanoim. This is an issue we discussed during our previous shiur, and in effect we're really continuing the topic so that in order to appreciate our discussion now, it is necessary to, of course, to have heard our previous daf. So, without giving any lengthy introduction so as to not, we'll say, be overly repetitive for those who heard the previous year, the issue that we're dealing with is the prohibition of cutting the hair in a circular form around one's head, removing the hair around in the temple area, which is a violation of the Torah commandment not to cut off the corners of one's head. Well, a head doesn't really have corners, but it's a reference to the hair that's oftentimes viewed as the side locks. That's when you see people that grow long hair in that area, sometimes referred to as payas. What is the halacha if one doesn't merely cut the hair around his head, leaving hair growing in the middle, but he shaves off all the hair of his head in we'll say a bowling pin style? That's called hakofas kol harosh. Is that prohibited? One thing is for sure, cutting the hair around, leaving a crop of hair in the middle of one's head, that would be prohibited. What about shaving off all of the head, the hair of one's head? So the Gemara opens with a long question, and you can see we've marked it with a long question marking. Leimo hakofas kol harosh tanoihi. Can we say that the shaving of the entire head of hair is a Tanaic controversy, as being prohibited or not? The Tanu Rabbanan. We have one source that starts with a quote, one-word quote from a pasuk dealing with a metzora. And these, I just want to emphasize, are topics that we have dealt with in the past, so that certainly if you're a first-time listener, you'll find some points here may be a little hard to grasp, but hopefully you're familiar with our previous shiurim. There's a pasuk that we've quoted on the side from Vayikra Perek Yud Dalet Pasuk Tes, and it refers to the purification process of a metzora. And it says, V'hoya bayom hashvi yigaleach es kol saro, reading from the pasuk on the side, yigaleach es kol saro, es rosho, v'es zikonoi, v'es gabo yiseino, v'es kol saro yigaleach, and the pasuk continues beyond that. However, for our purposes, it says on the 7th day of purification, he cuts off all of his hair, and that means all of the hair growing on one's body, including the head. And then the pasuk enumerates es rosho ve'ezikono, and we've pointed out in the past that would seem to be redundant. Once you say kol saro, I understand the hair of one's head and one's beard, etc., and so forth. So these words, many of the words in the pasuk would appear to be extra. What is their purpose? So we have this source says rosho. Ma Talmud lomar. Why does rosho have to be said when it was included in the phrase kol saro? So the response is, Lefi Shenemar, since there is a pasuk in Vayikra, Perek Yutes, which says, Lo sakifu pas roshchem, you shall not cut off the side locks of one's head, which pas roshchem, literally the corners of one's head, we referred to that before, the hair growing in the temple area. One shall not shave it off. Yachol, we continue at the top of Daf Nun Ches. Yachol Af mitzora kain. Does the prohibition of shaving around one's head apply to a mitzora? Now the mitzora is a person that has to remove all of his hair. So does the prohibition of we call it bal takif. Bal takif is lo sakifu, the same term. We say do the prohibition. Does that apply to a mitzora? Talmud lomar roy shoy. So you have this, we'll say this seemingly extra word that says it does not apply to a mitzora. He must remove all of the hair. The Torah giving license for him to do what would otherwise be prohibited to do. V'tanyo idoch roishoy. We quote again the same pasuk, the same word by the mitzora. Ma Talmud lomar. What do I need that word for? Lefi shenemar gabi Nazir. It says regarding the Nazir, tar lo yavor al rosho, that a razor shall not pass over his head. The prohibition of the Nazir to shave his head. Yochol af Nazir mitzora kain. Let us say a person in the midst of his Nazirus experienced tsaras, and part of the laws of tsaras, as we've indicated, upon achieving, we'll say purification, he must remove the hair on his body, including his head. So a Nazir who in the midst of his Nazirus experiences tsaras and its departure, is he also prohibited in ta'ar lo ya'avor al rosho? Talmud lomar rosho. So therefore I have that extra word from mitzora telling me that a Nazir mitzora must remove the hair. In effect, if he was not a mitzora, he would have been in violation of ta'ar lo ya'avor al rosho. The pasuk rosho, according to the source number 2, tells me the Nazir mitzora must do it, must remove the hair. So now we have 2 Tanaic sources. Both of them open with the same word, rosho. The first source says that it tells me that a general mitzora is entitled to, we'll say, violate the negative command. And the second source is referring to a Nazir mitzora. So we have 2 different Tanaic sources, and they're clearly different from one another. The first source is giving an allowance for a standard, a regular mitzora to, let's say, violate bal takif. And the second source is focused on a Nazir mitzora, which would give us the feeling that if it wasn't for the fact that he was a Nazir, I wouldn't need the pasuk of rosho to give license for the complete head shaving. So what is the point of difference between these 2 sources? On the side of the Gemara you note a mivneh, a structural note, a triangle appears. These are nisyonos lahasbir ahevdel bein shnei hamakoros shuvu liel, attempts to explain the difference between these 2 sources. So take a bird's eye view of our daf, as we always like to do with Gemara markings, and you'll notice there's an attempt over here. In the middle of the daf, you'll see actually a couple lines later from here another attempt. In the middle of daf, a third attempt to explain the difference. Now, the first attempt, of course, is part of our long question. My love, we continue in the Gemara, is it not so tanoihi that the issue of complete hair shave as being a Torah prohibition is a machlokes tanoim. And how do you see that over here? Laman de Omar min Nazir. The second source that says that Rosho is licensed for the Nazir Mitzorah to shave his head indicates that a regular Mitzorah doesn't need a pasuk to allow that. Why not? Because what he's doing isn't the problem. So the second source, Kosovar, Hakofas kol rosh lo shmo hakofa, that the shaving of the entire head, in general, is not a problem. In other words, the Torah prohibition is only shaving the head around, leaving a crop growing from the middle of the head, possibly like the Mohawk style haircut. As this recording is being made, many of the listeners might be familiar with that. That Mohawk style haircut is clearly prohibited for a Jew to take. If the Mohawk style haircut involves a very close razor-like shave of the head, on the removing all the hair from the sides of the head, leaving hair growing simply in the middle, that would be Baal Takif. But a complete, let's say, bowling pin style haircut, according to source number 2, wouldn't be a problem. And therefore the pasuk that's giving me license to violate something isn't a reference to a standard mitzorah. Because what is a standard mitzorah doing? He's removing all the hair from his body, including all the hair from his head. According to source number 2, that's not a problem. So I don't need a pasuk to give me license for something that itself is permitted in the first place. So what is the pasuk doing according to source number 2? It's giving me license. The word rosho, that extra word rosho by mitzorah, is giving license for a Nazir mitzorah. Now a Nazir is not allowed to take haircuts, regardless of what kind of haircut. He's not allowed to take haircuts. But if he's a Nazir mitzorah, if he's purifying himself from tzoras during his Nazirus, the tzoras law preempts the Nazirus restriction, and the Torah therefore is dictating he must remove his hair, contrary to standard Nazirus halachas. But once again, I know we're repeating ourselves, once again, a standard mitzorah doesn't need license, according to number 2, to shave all of his hair off, because hakofas kol harosh lo shmo hakof is not a problem. V'chi asakra, and you can see we're using this double underline to highlight what the role of the pasuk is, therefore, according to that particular source, according to source number 2. So what is the role of the pasuk? Lemidchi, to preempt, to push aside es loisase ve'aseh. You see, this we didn't mention before. When you're dealing with a Nazir, we mentioned that a Nazir is not allowed to shave his head. But in addition to that prohibition, there's also a positive command in the Torah called Kadosh Yihiyeh, that he must experience sanctity. Kadosh Yihiyeh, and for our purposes, Kedusha means separated from, something that you sanctify, you push aside for a specific holy purpose. In the case of a Nazir, his hair is pushed aside, so to speak, from haircuts. It's Kadosh Yihiyeh Gadel Seah Peroshay, is in order to prohibit the haircuts. There is a positive command in the Torah that his hair remains sanctified, so to speak. So in the case of a Nazir, there are 2 mitzvahs. There's a negative command, lo yavor tar, and a positive command, kodesh yagadel perasei roishai. So how can a mitzorah go ahead and shave off? Let me explain. A Nazir mitzorah, how can he go and shave off his hair? Is he not trying to fulfill one positive command that the mitzorah has? That's a mitzvah saseh, a positive command, to supersede 2 commands. That's 1 versus 2. On your own, you wouldn't have thought that the Mitzorah positive command can supersede the two commands that you have by the Nazir. What are the two commands? The Lo Yisasev Lo Yavortar, of the razor shall not pass over his head, and the positive command of Kadoshiyah. So, without a specific scriptural reference that you have by Nazir, the extra word Rosho, I wouldn't have known that the Nazir Mitzorah is to do the Mitzorah haircut. So I need the word Rosho to tell me that the positive command of Tzorav's purification overrules two other commands that would have otherwise been prohibited. Just to repeat this point again, usually two beats out one. But in this case, the one by Mitzorah beats out the two commands that you have by the Nazir Mitzorah, the Nazir who has two commands, one negative, Lo Yavortar, and one positive, Kadoshiyah. Ve'idach Savar, that means the source number one who said Rosho is used to tell me about a standard Mitzorah that he is to remove all his hair and thereby supersede the standard command of that which applies to all people, not to do what? Not to shave off all of one's hair from his head. So this opinion number one, Savar Hakofas Kol Harosh, Shmo Hakofa. That what a Mitzorah is doing, what a standard Mitzorah is doing, is something that, if he wasn't a Mitzorah, would have been prohibited. What is the Mitzorah doing? He's shaving his entire human body of all its hair, including a complete head hair removal. That would have been prohibited if not for the fact he's a Mitzorah. So in simple terms, Hakofas Kol Harosh, according to opinion number one, is a problem, is prohibited. V'chiyasa Kra, according to source number one, what's the role of the pasuk? Lemidchi lav greda. Lemidchi once again means to supersede, to push off. Lav greda means a simple, singular, negative command. So that the positive command of Tzoras purification supersedes the negative command of Lo Sakifu Pas Roishchem, of we call Bal Takif. Later, the Gemara will have to investigate. According to this opinion, all we see is that the pasuk is allowing the positive command, Asay Doichaloisas, the positive command of Tzoras purification, to supersede a single negative command. What about the Nazir Mitzorah, according to this opinion? According to this opinion, we see license only for Asay Doiche Loisase. What about Asay being Doiche Loisase Ve'asay? That 1 versus 2 scenario. So we don't have that information yet, according to this opinion. Now you can see our long question finished at this point. What was the question? Can we say that the issue of Hakofas Kol Rosh is a machlokes tanoim? At this point it would seem, yeah. According to source number 2, Hakofas Kol Rosh is not prohibited, and according to source number 1, Hakofas Kol Rosh for someone other than a Mitzorah, for a standard individual, would yes be prohibited. Oma Rava. So here we have a new approach. That's why you have a triangle here. A new approach in dealing with these two Tanaic sources. And you can see this new approach is a rejection of our suggestion. We suggested that Hakofas Kol Harosh is a machlokes tanoim. Omar Rava de kulei alma Hakofas Kol Harosh lo shmo hakofa. Note how we've marked the Gemara. We underlined the kulei alma because this is the main point structurally. We suggested before that Hakofas Kol Harosh was a machlokes tanoim. Rava says no. There is total agreement that what Hakofas Kol Harosh lo shmo hakofa, complete bowling pin head shave is not a problem. The only problem from the Torah perspective would be the mohawk style haircut, or the haircut. There's some certain idolatrous religions that shave the hair around their head, leaving a long type of ponytail growing out the middle of the head. That is certainly prohibited. But only that is prohibited, not a bowling pin bald head shave. Before we go further, take a look at the next triangle. There, the Gemara says, Ela de kule almo hakofas kolarosh shmo hakof. A very 180-degree turnaround in the third approach in dealing with these sources. According to the next triangle, the middle of the page, you see that there will be total agreement that the bowling pin style haircut is yes a problem. So in the meantime, we have Rava. So Rava says, as far as the sources above are concerned, there is agreement to kuliyama hakofas kolarosh lo shmo hakofa. The complete head shave ordinarily would not be a problem. Well, if you say that ordinarily it wouldn't be a problem, so then of the two sources above, source number 2 is the one that makes more sense. Means it's easier to understand source number 2, because what's happening in source number 2? We're using the extra word from tzoras and relating it to the case of a Nazir mitzora. A standard Nazir has a real prohibition of taking haircuts. So I need a pasuk to allow the Nazir mitzora to do that which a standard Nazir would not be allowed to do. According to source number 1, though, when you tell me that the total head shave is not a problem, what do I need Rosho for to tell me that a mitzora is allowed to do something that other people wouldn't be allowed to, but other people would be allowed to do it, according to this approach? So we're saying that everyone agrees that the total head shave is not a problem. The pasuk, according to the first source, Kegoin shehekif ulebesof gileach. The first source is telling me that we're saying that a mitzora is allowed to shave off all his hair. What is he allowed to do, in fact? What the Gemara just said, he's allowed to shave his head around. And if you were to stop at that point, there you would have a problem. But the pasuk tells me he can do that. He can shave his head around, provided he goes on to shave off the rest of his hair growing in the middle of his head. So that it's a type of two-stage process, where in terms of how he's doing his hair shaving, he's first shaving around, and then he continues to shave off the rest. And the pasuk is telling me that a mitzora would be allowed to do that. Why is he allowed to do that? If he would have done it in one shave, removing all his hair in one shaving action, he would not have been guilty, because of what we said, that hakofas kolarosh is mutter to begin with. When he opts to shave first around and then remove the hair growing in the middle of his head, Nami lo mechayev. He's also not in violation. So the pasuk, according to Rava's explanation, for source number 1, is talking about a regular mitzora, and he's allowed to do the hair removal of a mitzora, whereby at the first stage he's actually doing something that the Torah would have prohibited, namely shaving around. The Gemara says that cannot be the pshat. That cannot be the explanation, because we in fact would not allow that. And why not? Umi kosav krohachi. Would the pasuk write something like that? In other words, is the Torah telling me that I'm allowed to do a procedure that I could have accomplished anyway through a permitted fashion? Because what are we saying? We're saying you're allowed to do a procedure in a prohibited fashion even though there was a permitted way for you to have done it. Well, we're going to tell you now there's a rule that if you have two paths, one involves accomplishing the goal but using a prohibited method, when at the same time there was a permitted method to reach that same goal, we will not allow you to use the prohibited method. The only time we can entertain using a prohibited method based on some type of scriptural license is because you have no other option. But to activate scriptural license to proceed on a path that is prohibited when at the very same time there was a permitted path to choose, you cannot take advantage of some type of scriptural license to choose the method that is prohibited. Why not do it the mutter way? Now, we'll see this in the Gemara text. Once again, Umi kosav krohachi, would the Torah have given license to first shave around and then shave off the middle of the head? V'homer Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish presents the rule that we just explained. Kol mokom she'ata moitze aseh v'lo yisaseh. Wherever you have a conflict between a positive command on the one hand and a negative command on the other hand, imato yochol l'kayem es shnehem mutav. If there is a way for you to fulfill the positive command without violating the negative command, then great. Then that's what you have to do. Ve'im lav, if there is no other option to fulfill the positive command other than violating the negative command, then we say, Yavoy aseh ve'yidche es lo yisaseh. We allow the positive command to supersede, preempt the negative command. But in the case of the Nazir, in the case of the Metzorah, the standard Metzorah, his goal, his positive command is to remove all the hair on his head. That's his positive command. Achieve bowling pin style haircut. Is the only way to do that by first shaving around? Not at all. You could first shave the middle of your head. And then in the final stages remove the side locks. And since that method will enable you to accomplish the Nazir, the Metzorah goal, why in the world would we allow you to first shave around and only afterwards shave off the middle? That would be prohibited. And I can accomplish the Metzorah style haircut without violating the negative command of Bal Takif. And as a result, you could not possibly say, as we suggested above, that the Rosha word gives license to a Metzorah to first shave around and then later remove the rest of the hair. That's just not what Rosha could be teaching us. Ela de kule almo hakofas kol haroish mo hakofa. So rather, it's as far as the sources above are concerned, the total hair removal, the bowling pin style haircut, is a problem, is prohibited in general. It's prohibited in general. So I therefore need the Rosho Posuk to tell me that if a person experiences saras, he is allowed to do that which is otherwise prohibited. So as far as source number 1 is concerned, that makes perfect sense. And it makes so much sense where our question now is, according to source number 2, he is using the pasuk of Rosho to tell me about a Nazir Mitzorah. Where does he know the basic halacha that a positive command supersedes a negative command? We have that right over here. You have the positive command of the Mitzorah. A standard Mitzorah, not a Nazir Mitzorah, basic Mitzorah, to achieve purification, which involves total hair removal, and that will be at the expense of a negative command: do not shave off the sides of your hair. So, according to source number 2, where does he know that basic idea? Positive command has the power of superseding a negative command. So that's what the Gemara has to explain now. Just to repeat ourselves, at this point, if you say the Kulei HaMakofas Kol Rosh Shmo HaKofa, source number 1 that uses Rosho to tell me about a standard Mitzorah doing his Mitzorah haircut, that makes sense, because over there you have a positive, you need a pasuk to give me license to supersede the negative command of Baal Takif. So the Gemara goes on and says, source number 2 that said Rosho is dealing with a Nazir Mitzorah, Lav Grei Dominole. Where does he learn the basic idea that a positive command can supersede a negative command? You might want to say this in maybe in simplistic terms. According to source number 2, he's saying that a positive command, the Mitzorah purification, has the power of pushing off a positive and a negative. But before you get to that, you've got to establish that a positive command supersedes a negative command in general. How do you jump that step? So that's what the Gemara is here to answer. Yolif, source number 2, will tell you this idea of positive command overruling when they come into conflict. The positive will overrule the negative. Yolif mi Gedilim. He learns it from the mitzvah of Gedilim. You know what Gedilim are? I don't blame you, it's not a common word. But you do know what tzitzis are. Gedilim Ta'aseh Lecha is a pasuk that is a reference to the making of tzitzis. In the Torah, that positive mitzvah appears immediately following a negative command: do not wear shatnez. Shatnez is fabric, is garments that mix wool and linen, that have wool and linen mixed together in them. So it's prohibited to have standard garments with wool, linen, fabric combination. When what does the Torah say? The Omar Kro, the pasuk says, "Lo silba shatnez." Vitanya, lo silba shatnez, do not wear shatnez. Shatnez is the mixture of wool and linen clothing. Vitanya, lo silba shatnez. And ha gedilim ta'aseh lecha mehem. When you look in the Torah, as we just mentioned, you will see first there's a warning: do not wear shatnez, and immediately following it, it says, "And thou shalt make tzitzis." What the Torah is trying to tell you is that in general you should not wear shatnez. However, when it comes to the making of tzitzis, there you are allowed to combine wool and linen in the fulfillment of the mitzvah of tzitzis. So that from there you see there's a negative command: do not wear wool linen combination. However, when it comes to the positive command of tzitzis, you're allowed to make tzitzis even though you might be violating shatnez. Positive, namely tzitzis, overpowers, supersedes negative lo silba shatnes. So once, what we said, the author of source number 2 that spoke about Rosho telling the Nazir Mitzvah to take his haircut, that source number 2 knows the basic idea of positive overruling negative from the mitzvah of tzitzis. Once he knows asay doichel ases from tzitzis, he can go on to the next step, that an asay is doiche lois aseh ve'aseh in the case of mitzorah. Mitzorah, in the case of the Nazir mitzorah, his positive of mitzorah, purification, superseding the positive and negative commands that exist by the Nazir. Oman de nafka le me rosho, the one, that's source number 1 above, the first diamond above, that source number 1 who learned asay doichelois asa from the word rosho, my time alone nafka le megedilim, why doesn't he use tzitzis as the source for that information? Omar loch lichiderova hu da'asa. The pasuk dealing with the tzitzis is necessary for a teaching of Rava, which basically we're going to see shortly, which localizes the pasuk by tzitzis to a tzitzis-related matter, and not as a source for the general concept of asay doichelois aseh. The Rava Rami. Rava raises what appears to be a contradiction in the psukim regarding tzitzis. Ksiv v'nosnu al tzitzis hakonof. It's a quote from the parsha of tzitzis that many of you are familiar with from Kriyas Shema, and from this we learn hakonof min konof. That means that the tzitzis that you insert into the corners of your garment must be made of the same material as the garment itself. Uksiv, there's another pasuk, the one that we recited before, Tsemer upishtim yachdov, and the pasuk continues to say Gedilim ta'aseh lecha, which would seem to be that when you make tzitzis, you make them of tsemer or pishtim, you make them of wool or linen, regardless of what the garment is made of. So that would seem to be a contradiction. On the one hand, the pasuk in Bamidbar Tezvav says tzitzis must be made of the same material as the garment, and therefore if it's a cotton garment, you can't put woolen threads into it. It's not the same material. And yet the other pasuk says, Semru pishtim yachtov gedilim ta'aseh lecha, which would indicate if you have a cotton garment, you can put in woolen threads as your tzitzis. The Gemara and Rava explains, Ha ketzad, how are we to resolve this? As follows, Semru pishtim potrim bein b'minon bein shelo b'minon, wool and linen, tzitzis strings, have the power to fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzis, literally exempt garments that are of 4 corners, whether the garment is minon, is itself wool or linen, or other fabrics. So there's a special power to tsemer and pishtim. Now, shar minim, other materials, if you have, let's say, strings made of silk, silken strings will be suitable only for a silken garment. If you have cotton strings, the cotton strings will be suitable to serve as tzitzis for a cotton garment. That's b'minon potrin, shelo b'minon ein potrin. B'minon means like fabric garment. Such strings of that same fabric will exempt. If it's a fabric garment made of fabric other than the strings, so those strings will not exempt the garment. Of course, unless, as we said before, they happen to be wool or linen strings. So now, Rava then uses the pasuk of Lo sil b'shatnei semru pishtim yachtov gedilim ta'aseh lecha to tell us a tzitzis related halacha. That's what Rava does, and that too is what the diamond number 1 source that we saw at Nun Zayin Amud Beis, that's what that source who learned Asay Doicha Lo Yisaseh from the mitzvah of Tzoras, pushing aside Baal Takif, and why he didn't learn from the Tzitzis Pasuk, because source number one uses the Tzitzis Pasuk for Rava's law. The Gemara continues. V'haitano demapik l'roishoi l'lav greda. You can see we're using a numbering scheme that always is referring back to those sources in diamonds. So diamond number one that used rosho l'lav greda to tell me that the asay doicha loisa aseh in a simple head-off situation. That's a poorly chosen pun, but in a simple situation of aseh versus lo aseh. What about the case of the Nazir, where you have an aseh versus an aseh v'lo aseh? The asi aseh v'dochias lo aseh v'aseh minolan. Where will source number one learn the idea that the positive command of tzoras, of tzoras purification involving the hair shaving, that it can supersede a situation where you have a lo sasev aseh against it, like we saw in the case of the Nazir. Nafgalei mi zikono. So the author of source number one will learn it from the extra word zikono that we also found in the case of tzoras. Remember we said that the pasuk tells the mitzvah remove all of your hair, and then it goes to enumerate different parts of the body. The zikono is the beard, the facial hairs. Desanya, zikono ma talmud lomar. What is the purpose of the word zikono in the case of the mitzvah? And as we said, the mitzvah is told already to remove all his body hairs. Why specify zikono, facial hairs? Because, well, there's another pasuk elsewhere. It says, now note, this pasuk is from Vayikra Perek Chaf Aleph. That section of the Torah deals with laws pertaining to kohanim, and it says there, upaas zikonam lo yigalechu. There, without translating the pasuk literally, facial hairs shall not be shaven off. Yochol af kohen mitzora kain. Does the same restriction apply to a Kohen who happened to experience tzoras? Talmud lomar zikono. The word zikono in Vayikra Perek Yudalet dealing with the mitzora says that the Kohen mitzora must shave off his facial hairs. And we have a little note on the star. It's very important to note this, that by the Kohen you have in fact a lo sasa that we said already, there is also a positive command, kedoshim you, that the kohanim observe kedusha being sanctity, and in this case the kohen restrictions, when fulfilled, represent a fulfillment of this positive command. So we have then source number one, the diamond source number one that we saw at the beginning of the shiur. We'll learn the principle of asay doicha lois asev asay in the case of the mitzora from the case of the kohen. By the way, in general, throughout the Torah, we don't allow an asay, a positive command, to supersede a, let's say, conflicting negative plus positive. One doesn't beat out two. But in the case of mitzora, we're saying one beats out two. We continue. Source number two, who used the word rosho to tell me this idea that the positive command of tzoras supersedes positive negative that you found by the Nazir. Leilif mi zikono. Why not learn from zikono? Like we just saw that the positive command tzoras pushes off the positive and negative by kahuna. The Gemara response. Note that we have a long response taking you till the fourth line down from the top of Omid Beis. According to you that are asking on me that I chose to learn Asay Dochel from Nazir and not from the case of Kahuna, well, according to you that let's say that felt that in asking this question, you apparently feel that the Kohen source is a strong basis for coming to the conclusion that asay doicha lo yisasev asay. Well, if you're so enthusiastic about the Kohen source, the kaim alon be'alma, we have a general principle, and we continue at the top of Omid Beis. What do we hold in general? We mentioned this a few minutes ago, that in the rest of the Torah, we don't find that a positive command can supersede a conflicting area where there's a positive and negative against it. Once again, why not use the case of the Kohen Mitzorah as precedence for the rest of the Torah, that asay, on the one hand, can supersede a conflicting area where there's an asay and a lo saseh against it. You don't learn from Kohen to establish a general principle. Why not? There is a negative command by the Kohen, but when you're dealing with Kohanim are a unique, specific, subsection of Israel, of the Jewish people. Things that apply to Kohanim don't apply across the boards. For example, a Kohen is warned not to defile himself to the dead. That's not true with regard to people from the general population. In fact, there's quite a mitzvah, a commandment that's fulfilled by attending funerals and burying the dead, etc. But Kohanim cannot do that. That's called a lav, a negative command. She'ena shava bakol. It's not across the boards. It's not a uniform prohibition. Therefore, it's a weaker type prohibition. And we cannot learn from that kind of area of lav she'ena shava bakol to apply it across the boards. Therefore, Nazir mikohen nami lo yolif shekain lav she'ena shava bakol. The case of the Nazir Mitzorah, Nazirus is an area of law that applies to anybody. Anyone can be a Nazir. So the realm of Nazir Mitzorah cannot be derived from the way the Torah views a Kohen Mitzorah, because a Kohen Mitzorah is an example of a lav she'ena shava bakol. Therefore, in order to establish that the asay, the positive of Saras, will overrule the positive negative that you find by a Nazir, I have to find a Nazir source. I can't use a source that we find by Kahuna. So with that, we understand why the Manda Omar that used Rosho doesn't use Zikono, which was representative of the Kohen source. We continue. Uman demoikim lahai roishoi benozir. According to source number 2, that used the word Rosho by Mitzorah to tell me that a Nazir Mitzorah is to follow the Tzorah's purification process, which involves a positive, pushing off a positive and negative. And we see then that we see the power of Tzoras, that it's doiche loisasev asay, that applies across the boards. So according to source number 2 that said all of that, lomali zikono, what do I need the zikono drasha for? What did Zikono supposedly represent? Well, up till now we thought it represents that a Kohen Mitzorah shaves off all his head, allowing the asay to doicha l'loisasev asay by kahuna. But opinion number 2, who accomplishes that through Rosho, he doesn't need Zikono for that. In other words, the din of Kohen mitzora can be learned from the din of a Nazir mitzora. Logically, you don't need a scriptural reference. So what does the word zikano mean for opinion number 2? For Tanaic source number 2, diamond number 2 from above. Answer, miboya le lichidisanya. He uses the word zikano for something that we've learned extensively in the past, back on Daf Mem, to establish that the tiglachas mitzora, that the hair shaving that a mitzora must do, is only with a razor, not a scissors, not a tweezers. That the Torah is commanding the mitzora, we're allowing the mitzora to do. When we say allow, we mean not only allow, but he must do that which otherwise would have been prohibited. We mentioned a point before with Reish Lakish. You don't have scriptural allowances to violate things if there is an alternative way to accomplish your goal without doing the violation. In this case, what we're saying is the mitzora is going to be, I say allowed, but allowed means allowed and required to do the razor hair removal, and without the scriptural reference, that would have been prohibited. And furthermore, and as far as the mitzvah is concerned, there's no other way to accomplish the tzoras hair removal other than through a razor. Because if there was another way, we wouldn't allow him to use the razor. So, if you're, just to review this last point, according to opinion we call diamond number 2 from before, that uses Rosho to tell me Aseh Doichalois Aseh by Nazir Mitzora, what does he do with the word zikano? So we answer miboya le lichadisanya. He needs it for the following, and we simply preempted introduced the Gemara by telling you he's going to teach us that the mitzora hair removal must be done only with a razor. And what is the source? We have a parenthesis section because of the Bach reading, so we're skipping down a couple lines. Upaas zikonam lo yigalechu. This was a pasuk from Vayikra Perek Chof Aleph. We made reference to this pasuk before. The question is, Yochol av gilcha b'misparayim yei chayav? When it says here that they shall not remove the facial hairs, does that mean not to remove it with a scissors as well? To cut one's facial hairs with a scissors, is that also prohibited? Talmud Lomar V'loi sashchis. Now this v'lo sashchis is a pasuk from Vayikra, Perek Yutes pasuk Chav Zayin. We've included on the side of the Gemara. It says Lo sakifu pas roishchem v'lo sashchis es pe'as zikonecha. So the word Lo sashchis means you shall not destroy the facial hairs. Well, Ilo sashchis yochol likton b'milka v'ritni chayav. If the Torah's prohibition is not to destroy facial hairs, does that include removal with a tweezers or a plane? Talmud Lomar upas zikonam lo yigalechu. Here the word yigalechu appears. So in Perek Chof Aleph, referring to the facial hair prohibition, you see the word yigalechu. And in Vayikra Yutes, which also is a reference to facial hair removal, prohibition thereof, you see the word sashchis. We have ruled out scissors because scissors don't represent hashchosa, tashchis. We've ruled out likton and that's milkat and rehitni because of the word yigalechu. So that what remains for us to discover is what in fact is prohibited. His scissors are not prohibited. Tweezers and planes are not prohibited. So then what kind of shaving has in it the element of hashchasa, of destruction? The use of a razor. So now with that having been said, facial hair removal in general is prohibited by using a razor blade, using to shave one's facial hairs. And now we add the main point. The word zikono that we found, the extra word by Mitzorah, the word zikono that appeared in Vayikra Perchof Yud Dalid, that word tells me that a Mitzorah, when it comes to his facial hair removal, noticing the word zikono, that word, by the way, zokon, appeared in Vayikra Yutes, in Vayikra Chof Aleph, all the psukim that we've been citing till now regarding the prohibition of facial hair removal. The word zikono by the Mitzorah comes to tell me that he, the Mitzorah, must remove his hair through the method that otherwise, if he wasn't a Mitzorah, would have been forbidden. So what's the method that would have been forbidden? The razor blade. The Mitzorah, he must use the razor blade in his hair removal. Now, Uma demapik lei lahai roishoi lelav greda, according to source number 1, who we saw quite a while ago, uses the word rosho to tell me that asay of Mitzorah is doiche the loisaseh of Baal Takif. Loma li lemichtav roishoi, v'loma li lemichtav zikono. Wouldn't it have been enough for the Torah to write just the pasuk of rosho? Because as we've seen till now, the word rosho could be taken, as we saw, but the same rosho could be taken to teach me asay doicha loisaseh ve'asay. As we saw, source number 2 used the word by the Nazir Mitzorah. So, the word rosho, as the Gemara goes on to say, mashma lemidchi lav greda, it has that mashmos, that implication. Umashma limidchi loisaseh ve'aseh. It also has that potential teaching of asay of Mitzorah superseding an asay vilos asay, like we saw in the case of the Nazir Mitzorah. Hilkoch shokul. Shokul means it's balanced. The word rosho can go either way. Hilkoch shokul hu v'yavo shnehem. Both halachas. When you have a term in the Torah that can be used to go either this way or that way, and there's no more pressing reason to go one way over the other, we say, go both ways. This concept you can see in Gemaras elsewhere in the Shas and Bava Kama, in Zvachim, you see on the side there's a note where you find this in other places. So if you say that I'm going to use Rosho to teach me Asay Doichel Aseh Greda, and Asay Doichel Lois Aseh Ve'aseh as well, what do I need the word Zikono for? Note that we're focusing this question on what we said was Manda Omar number 1. As far as the other Tanaic source, Manda Omar number 2, we asked, according to Manda Omar number 2, that Rosho taught Asay Doichel Aseh Ve'aseh, and that opinion learned Asay Doichel Aseh Greda from the Tzitzis pasuk. We explained what he does with Zikono. So right now our discussion is focusing on Manda Omar, the first of the Tanaic sources that we call Manda Omar number 1, the first diamond. And the question once again is, what does he use the word Zikono for? The Gemara is going to answer, before we read it in the text, he's going to tell you that it's true that I have Rosho telling me Asay Doiche Lois Aseh Ve'aseh, and that pasuk featured the Nazir Mitzorah. The word Zikono, we will say, refers to the Kohen Mitzorah. We saw this at the bottom of Amud Aleph. And that Man Omar number 1 introduced Zikono as being the source for Aseh Doichel Lois Aseh Ve'aseh by the Kohen. At this point in the Gemara, though, we're saying that the Aseh of Mitzorah is Doichel Lois Aseh Ve'aseh. He will agree that you see that by the Nazir Mitzorah. That very same Man Omar had told me at the bottom of Amud Aleph that Aseh Doichel Lois Aseh Ve'aseh is learned from the case of the Kohen Mitzorah. So what we really have on our hands, we have 2 topics of Mitzorah, the rules of Soras, being Doichel Aseh Ve'los Aseh, one in the realm of Nazir, and the other in the realm of Kohen. And here the Gemara will tell us, it's not enough that I have Aseh, Doichel Lois Aseh Ve'aseh by the Nazir. I need to have the Kohen source as well. And here's the explanation. In the Gemara, Kohen mi Nazir lo yolif. I would not have been able to derive the rule concerning a Kohen Mitzorah from the rule of a Nazir Mitzorah. The rule of the Nazir Mitzorah, in fact, has a certain weakness to it that would not allow me to learn the rules concerning a Kohen. Because Sheken Yeshno B'She'ela. Nazirus is part of the realm of vows. Vows can be undone. You can't undo the rules of a Kohen, but the rules that apply to a Nazir are subject to voidance. We call She'ela means approaching a Torah sage and explaining your plight in observing Nazirus. He can absolve you from that. So Nazirus has a built-in weakness to it. And therefore, even if you tell me that a Nazir Mitzorah is allowed to go through the Nazir purification process, I wouldn't know that by a Kohen. Therefore, I'm going to, even if I have Rosho that tells me Aseh of Nazir that Saras purification supersedes the rules of Nazir, I wouldn't know that Mitzorah purification supersedes the laws that pertain to Kahuna. Therefore, I need to have Zikono. And the other way around as well, Nazir Mikoyen lo Yolif, to suggest stating Mitzorah purification by Kohen, and I would be able to derive Nazir from that. I can't do that either, because Lav Sheina Shava B'Kol. The rules that apply to Kahuna are Kohen rules. The general topic of Kahuna is Kahuna, not something that is uniform to all of the Jewish people. And therefore, something that applies to Kohen, I wouldn't necessarily apply it to things like a Nazir, which are rules that apply to everybody. Okay, so now what do we have? We have Kahuna, Kohen Mitzorah, we have a Nazir Mitzorah, and we see in these 2 areas, Aseh, the positive command of Soras purification, superseding 2 realms of halacha, where we're allowing the positive to supersede, to preempt a positive plus negative. Well, couldn't I say that now we have precedent and we that Aseh Doichel Lois Aseh Ve'aseh and apply it to the rest of the Torah? No. Uba'alma lo yalfinon minayu, and in general, I will not learn from both of these areas, mishum di'ika lemifrach kidamoran, because we can undo that attempt, as we've said already. The Kohen has a weakness to it; it's a lav sheina sheva bakol. The Nazir has a weakness to it, that it's subject to she'elot, it can be absolved. There is a discussion in the Tosfos concerning a basic question that you would ask here in terms of Talmudic procedure you find throughout the Talmud that's called Sad HaShaveh. Why not create a common denominator between these two areas, the area of Kahuna and the area of Nazir, and say that even though each one is different, nevertheless, I see a common denominator that Aseh of Tzoras is Doicha Aseh V'Lois Aseh, and apply that, in fact, to the rest of the Torah. Why don't we say that over here? So that I'm going to leave unanswered, and those who want to research it can certainly look into the commentaries for such an answer. As we continue in the Gemara, we glance at the side. You notice we have a nosei/mivneh heading. We have a diamond that appears. The diamond will highlight the names Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. When we get to Rabbi Yochanan, we're going to notice Roman numerals 1 and 2. There are two versions as to what Rabbi Yochanan says. The note on the side points out where you see the diamond featured. The note says there's a machlokes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan b'mi shemekel kol gufo b'tar. The word mekal means to remove hairs, literally lighten the burden, lighten one's body burden of hairs. What if a person removes his body hairs with a razor? Is that something that one would be allowed to do? We're going to find some very interesting ideas in this sugya. And amongst the different ideas that we'll see is one's, let's say, bodily conduct. A man behaving like a woman and a woman behaving like a man will also be introduced later in the Gemara. Let's continue now in the Gemara text. Omar Rav, Meikal Odom Kol Gufo B'Ta'ar. A person is allowed to remove his body hairs. When we speak about body hairs, we're not referring right now to facial hairs or side locks. That is a different discussion. Here we're dealing with, let's say, cosmetic procedures. A person might, for whatever reason, want to shave his body. Maybe just for convenience purposes, we'll just say from the shoulders down. So that we avoid the isurim of pasikonim lo yigalechu and the problem of pas roshchem lo sakifu pas roshchem. To avoid those things, we'll talk in this particular sugya from shoulders down. I mentioned shoulders because from under the shoulders you already have armpit hairs, and then, of course, the rest of all areas where hair grows on the body. Rav says a person is allowed to use a razor, and there is no problem. And here you don't see this in the words of the Gemara, but what Rav is informing us is that there is no problem of. There's another pasuk in the Torah, Lo yilbash gever simlas isha. There's a negative command for a male, a Jewish male, to, literally put on the garments of a woman, but it would mean to adorn himself or approach his body hair like that of a woman. Now, so there's an assumption over here that that women are certainly allowed to shave body hairs. That's a womanly behavior from time immemorial. So that when the Torah was given, it was already understood that was how women conduct themselves. There's certain aspects of life that are givens. So Rav is telling us that this kind of, we'll say, cosmetic behavior on the part of a man is allowed. And it's not a problem of lo yilbash gever simlas isha, which is a Torah prohibition for a man to wear the garments of a woman. Meisvei, we're going to challenge Rav. It says, Hamavir beis hashechi beis ha'erva harei zeh loike. One who removes the beis hashechi, or armpit hairs, beis ha'erva, pubic hairs, he is loke. He is subject to lashing. Now, lashing is a punishment that indicates you're dealing with a Torah level violation. The Gemara answers, this isn't a problem for Rav. Ha b'tar, ha b'misparayim. The Tanaic source that says there's malchus, that's if you use a razor. Rav's halach of removing those hairs, that's b'misparayim. That's using scissors. But the Gemara is, how can you say that Rav said Rav's din was using the use of scissors? V'ha Rav nami b'tar k'omar. Notice we have a dot underlining with also little arrows to the side of the Gemara text. Look back at what Rav said. He said tar. Tar means a razor. So how can you say that in the defense of Rav, he was talking about his scissors. When Rav spoke about a razor and allowing it, Gemara says, no, that's not a problem. Ka'ain tar. Rav was speaking about scissors, but the use of scissors cutting very close to the skin surface. So cutting the hairs very close to the skin surface, using a scissors, giving a very close cut, so to speak, like a razor cut, but it's using a scissors. And that Rav allows. But Rav does not allow using a razor for body hair removal. Omar Reb Chia bar Abba, Omar Reb Yochanan. Note, we have Roman numeral number 1. There are 2 Lishonos of Reb Yochanan. Reb Yochanan is in a diamond because he too deals with this issue, like Rav. Now, I say like Rav, but be careful. He's arguing with Rav in our first presentation here. Hamavir beis hashechi ubeis erva loike. Rabbi Yochanan says that he's subject to malchus. Meisvei, we have a Tanaic source says, Havora seyar eino midivrei Torah elo midivrei sofrim. Body hair removal is not a Torah prohibition. Hence, what we're saying is there would be no lashing. Elo midivrei sofrim, it's a rabbinic prohibition. The Meforshim, by the way, point out that you have 2 Tanaic sources that in and of themselves would seem to be clashing with one another. And often in the Shas, you would say you have a stira, v'raminu, you say you have a stira between sources. That's not the approach this Gemara takes. We're simply focusing on Reb Yochanan, who says body hair removal involves lashing, meaning Torah level prohibition. Tanaic source saying rabbinic prohibition. The Gemara answers, "My loike nami de ka'amar." Rabbi Yochanan's use of the word loke, midarabonan. There is a concept known as makas mardus, literally lashings for rebelliousness. That's another term that refers to lashing that's administered through rabbinic authority, not Torah level authority. So Rabbi Yochanan's point is consistent with the Tanaic source that we just read. We continue at the top of Daf Nun Tes Omer Aleph, Ika Di Amri, another version of Rabbi Yochanan. Omer Reb Chia bar Abba, Omer Reb Yochanan. Hamavir beis hashechi ubeis ha'erva loike mishum lo yilbash gever simlas isha. Now here, it's going to be very hard to wiggle out of Rabbi Yochanan claiming he is telling you a din, a halacha of a rabbinic nature, when he says there is malchus for the hair, for a male to do body hair removal, and the Torah pasuk is cited, lo yilbash gever simlas isha, that a male shall not behave like a woman. Women remove body hairs. Men would be prohibited in practicing those body practices that are unique or specific to women. So Rabbi Yochanan, having said what he did, that the body hair removal on the part of a man is a Torah level violation. Meisvei, we now challenge him. He said, we have from a Tanaic source, Havora Seyar, Eino midivrei Torah, Elo midivrei Sofrim. Body hair removal is not a Torah level violation, it's rabbinic. Well, Hu di Omar, Ki Haitana. Rabbi Yochanan is based on a different Tanaic authority. Desanya Hamavir beis hashechi beis erva, Harei ze oiver mishum lo yilbash gever simlas isha. One who removes armpit hairs, pubic hairs, is in violation of lo yilbash gever simlas isha. So you have a Tanaic source that word for word matches that which Rabbi Yochanan said. V'tana kamo hay lo yilbash gever my dorish bay. The first opinion that said that body hair removal is only rabbinically prohibited, what does he derive from the pasuk of lo yilbash gever simlas isha? I'm sure some of you are probably thinking, why are you bothering asking this question? The first opinion said that hair removal is only rabbinic. As far as the pasuk is concerned, it's telling me simply that a man should not put on the garments of a woman. That's what the translation indicates. Lo yilbash gever, a male shall not dress in simlas isha, the dresses of a woman. So why Why are you asking this question of my Dorish Bey? The answer is forthcoming, but before we get into the answer, let us note the pasuk itself. We have it written on the side, Devarim, Perichov Beis Pasuk Hey. It reads, Lo yeh kli gever al isha, v'lo yilbash gever simlas isha, ki toavas Hashem Elokecha kol oisei eleh. The pasuk warns that kli gever, utensils or vessels of a man shall not be upon a woman, and a man shall not wear the clothing of a woman. And there's a key expression, ki toavas. It mentions here that toavas meaning it is an abomination. There is an abomination involved, anyone who does these things. Now, the term abomination has great significance. Not every simple prohibition in the Torah is called an abomination. Things might be prohibited, but they don't necessarily represent a to'eva. You find the word to'eva in the context often of immorality. Now, that having been said, we turn to the Gemara text. Miboyale lichdetanya. Source number 1 that we saw just above will tell you that lo yeh kli gever, the pasuk of lo yilbash gever simlas isha is for the following information in this Tanaic source. We quote the pasuk lo yeh kli gever al isha ma Talmud lomar. What is the Torah prohibiting? Im shelo yilbash ish simlas isha v'isha simlas ish. If all the pasuk is telling me is that men should not wear women's clothing and women should not wear men's clothing, Harei kvar nemar to'eva hi ve'ein kan to'eva. The pasuk says that there is an element of to'eva in what is being prohibited. And simple dressing up, that's not to'eva. That's not an abomination. Elo shelo yilbash, what is being proscribed here is ish simlas isha v'yeshev bein hanoshim. The Torah is saying that a man shall not put on a woman's garment and then sit amongst women. In other words, dress up as a woman and then put himself amongst women. V'isha simlas ish, nor shall a woman dress up as a man, v'teshev bein hanoshim, and then sit amongst men. And without too much need to activate imagination, one understands that this situation can easily lead to immorality. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Minayin shelo tetzei isha b'kli zayin l'milchama. From where do we know that a woman shall not wear upon herself, or shall not carry out into war standard weaponry? Klei zayin is a reference to standard weapons, rifles, guns, might very well include bazookas, and whatever else would be categorized as weaponry. So a woman shall not go into war with weaponry. Talmud lomar lo yeh kli gever al isha. Rashi points out something that's very, very interesting. There's a story told in the book of Judges, in Sefer Shoftim, where Yoel executed Sisera. Sisera was a general leading a battle against the Jewish people. She killed him. How did she kill him? She used a yosed. A yosed is a stake, S-T-A-K-E, a stake that holds down a tent. It's a very heavy metal peg with a relatively sharp end to it, or a tapered end to it. And she, after having him go to sleep, so she penetrated his skull with this yosed. Now, why did she use that? Why didn't she just simply take out a sword or some other spear? Why did she use that? So Rashi says that it's because of this prohibition that a woman is not supposed to, handle in battle standard weaponry. We continue in the source. V'lo yilbash gever simlas isha, shelo yisakein ish betikune isha. We look at Rashi, shelo yisakein ish betikune isha, dahachi metargaminon lei. The Targum, the Aramaic rendition of this pasuk is shelo yichol v'shelo yifarches bevigdei tzivonim shelisha, that a man shall not apply cosmetics and dress himself like a woman. I would like to read the Rashi again, in this time using the Nuschas Harivan. The Rashi we read before, Shelo Yisakein Ish B'Tikune Isha. According to Reb Lozer ben Yankov, what does V'lo Yilbash Gever Simlas Isha teach us? That he should not apply cosmetics or cosmetic procedures like that of a woman. Dahachi metargaminan lei shelo yichol shelo yifarches. Yichol has to do with a type of cosmetic. It's associated with a type of eye mascara. Yifarches has to do, in other places in the Shas we've seen this referring to different types of hair treatments. And here the Rivan says b'minei tzivonim shel isha. Tzivonim are colors, different types of cosmetics, or different color, rouge and mascara and eyeshadow and all kinds of other things that women are probably much more expert in than I am. But notice he changes it to minei tzivonim, and my thinking is that Reb Lozer ben Yankov is focusing on the lo yilbash gever simlas isha as dealing, specifically with cosmetics, and not merely with man putting on women's clothing. What one has to pause, and we're not going to do that in the context of our Daf Yomi shiur, but what is the difference between Rebbe Lozer ben Yankov and the Tanakama's approach? The Tanakama, again, we're going to say something that's very superficial. The Tanakama mentioned that the mere wearing of women's clothing on the part of a man could not be the Torah's prohibition, because where do you see an element of to'eva in that? How is that considered an abomination? So there, he explained, if a man puts on women's clothing and sits amongst women, there you can see how we can lead to something abominable. Rebbe Lozer ben Yankov focuses on cosmetic approaches to men, that they should not follow that of a woman. Does that represent something more abominable than the mere putting on of clothing? Does Rebbe Lozer ben Yankov speak about a man then going and sitting amongst the women, or is this in and of itself considered abominable? Because you're dealing with something that's even more body related to women that a man is doing than merely slinging over himself women's clothing. With that having been said, let's go on in the Gemara. Omar Rav Nachman ben Nazir muter. We look at the Tosfos. Ben Nazir muter lahavir beis hashechi beis erva. A Nazir who the Torah demands a hair shaving. Rav Nachman says that a Nazir would be allowed, not that he's obligated, that's not a Mitzorah type hair removal, but a Nazir would be allowed to remove armpit and pubic hairs. Tikosavar, Rav Nachman is of the opinion, Tosfos says, Achrei shenazir ma'avir kol seir rosho, since he's removing all the hair from his head, lo choshiv noi v'tikun l'gabi oiso ish la'avir beis hashechi beis erva. For him to continue removing the rest of his body hairs, since as a Nazir he has to remove all the head hairs, these would not be considered, let's say, cosmetic, a violation of tikkunim. It's not considered making himself look more pleasant. The Gemara, though, goes on to say, the less hilchus kavosei, the halacha does not follow Rav Nachman, it is prohibited for Nazir as well. We continue. Amru le Rabbana Reb Shimon bar Abba. The rabbis told Reb Shimon bar Abba, Chazina le Reb Yochanan the less le. We notice Reb Yochanan doesn't have any armpit hairs. Omar lahon, so Reb Shimon bar Abba said, you can relax. You don't have to suspect Reb Yochanan of doing something problematic. Machma zikna nashu. Because of his age, he was elderly, these hairs fell out. Hahu de ischayev negida kamei de Rabbi Ami. There was a person, a man, that was to be punished by negida, lashings. And the case came to Rabbi Ami. In applying lashings, so clothing, upper body clothing are removed, and igloi beis hashechi, his armpit became revealed. Chasid alo miglach, and it was seen that this offender's armpit hairs were in place. He hadn't shaven his armpit hairs. Amar lahon Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami says, Shivkuha, leave this man be. In other words, spare him of the malchus. Dain min chavraya hu. This man is well, literally one of us. In other words, this man, the Gemara doesn't tell us why he was subject to malchus. We don't have to assume necessarily that it's malchus because he violated some type of Torah precept. We've seen elsewhere that malchus can be administered even for rabbinic type violations. That is something to look into on the side. But for our purposes, here you see that Rabbi Ami was, we'll say, impressed with this individual in that he observed this law. Namely, he did not remove his armpit hairs, and that was enough to convince Rabbi Ami that this guy couldn't be such a bad chap, and spare him because he is one of us. He is one of us who observes halacha. On the side we have a double underline featured under the mivneh heading, where the phrase Ba minei Rav Merbchia is featured. You see two questions that Rav presents to Reb Chia in our topic. Ba minei Rav me Rebbe Chia. Rav asks of Reb Chia, Mahu ligaleach. Can I use a scissors for armpit hair removal? Omar le. Reb Chia says back, Bar Pachti. Bar Pachti is an expression meaning son of Talmid Chacham. Or you could say wise one. Zman yesh lo. When Rav asked the question, he asked, can I cut off the armpit hairs? Because if I leave them, they're going to grow and they're going to eventually bother me. We have to just back up a bit. I made a mistake in the reading. I skipped some words. So we go back to the double underline. Ba minei Rav mi Reb Chia, Mahu legaleach. Rav asks, can I, following the Rashi explanation and the second explanation you find in the Tosfos from the Baal Ochos Gedolos, can I use a scissors to cut the armpit hairs? Omar le Ozer. So Rav Chia says, no, it is prohibited. Omar le v'hol godal. But it's going to grow, and if it gets too long, it's going to then start bothering me. I'm going to have tsar from it. So I'm asking I'm not asking for, let's say, for cosmetic reasons that would be maybe questionable, but it's going to bother me. Omar le, so Reb Chia says, Bar Pachti, son of Talmid Chacham, Zman Yeshlo. There is a limit to how long armpit hair grows. They're not like facial hairs that grow and grow. If you don't trim the beard, it will grow very long. Not so with regard to armpit hairs. Kolzman shu godel, no share. It grows, reaches a certain point of length, and they fall out. So if your concern is that they will, if they keep growing, they're going to mitzayir you, they're going to cause you discomfort, you don't have to worry about that. There's a Tosfos that we'd like to look at together, which, you see, it's 4 lines from the very bottom of the Tosfos commentary. V'hol kol godil, v'hol v'sofa ligdal etzaroso. since it's eventually going to grow and cause me discomfort, af kishigalchenu ein ze korei tikun v'noi. Even when he cuts it off now, it wouldn't be considered some type of beautification. The only concern he has, and the only motivation for him to cut it off, is to save himself from the eventual discomfort. Next Tosfos says, Gvul yeshlo, shenu gadol v'holech kishiur rosh, kiseyar harosh, v'leko tzara. It's not going to ever come to the situation of tsar. Mashma, kishe'ein adam miskavein lenoi, elo linotzel, the less be mishum kli gever. The Tosfos observes, therefore, that where one's motivation for whatever behavior, in this case the cutting off of hairs, is not for some type of beautification, but it's simply to avoid discomfort, there is no prohibition of the pasuk we made reference to before of lo yeh kli gever al isha v'lo yilbash gever simlas isha. V'im kain, now Tosfos continues and concludes, hamistatu b'mara, one who looks into a mirror. Now here there's a certain assumption that looking in mirrors is something that's characteristic of women. Women are often or constantly looking into mirrors to see how they look. That's we'll say a womanly behavior, looking in mirrors. Therefore, one who looks into a mirror, let's say one is cutting his own hair, or he's shaving in a permitted fashion, and he wants to avoid hurting himself. Shori, under those circumstances, it would be allowed for a man as well to look into a mirror. V'chein omer HaRav Sheraber of Shmuel Me'avira Hoya Mistaper B'mara. And here you have testimony from the Balei Tosfos that he used to take a haircut in the presence of a mirror, and is using a mirror. So now we turn back to the Gemara. Ba'minei Rav Mirabchia. Mahu lochuch. Lochuch is a procedure of, let's say, scratching oneself. Rashi, I should say Tosfos points out, and we look together at the Tosfos at the bottom, he says, Ma'u lochuch l'ishachich k'dei lahashir seir beis hashechi beis ever. He's scratching or rubbing himself in order to remove armpit hairs or pubic hairs. So now we go back to the Gemara. Is it mutter to lachuch? Amar lei, so Rabbi says Ozer, it is prohibited. Bevigdo mahu, using, let's say, rubbing oneself using his garment, not directly with his fingernails, but using a garment. So he says Amar lei mutter. The Gemara continues with a second version, Iko di Amri, Ba minei betfila bevigdo mai. The question was rather, let us say someone is in the midst of davening, in the midst of prayer. Can he rub himself with his garment so that, Rashi says, so that lice fall away from him, and he doesn't actually touch his flesh? So the answer that's forthcoming, Amalei, Ozer. So he says, no, that would not be allowed. And the Gemara though says, "V'les hilchasa kavosei." The halacha is not like that restrictive ruling. And we look at the end of the Rashi, Amalei Ozer v'les hilchasa kavosei, mishum dekevan di'eno nogeh bivsaro. Since he's not in direct contact with his flesh, mutur lochuch. It is allowed for one to rub himself. Whereas using your fingers directly, and certainly in the context of prayer, to scratch yourself for the purpose of removing lice, using, again, direct flesh contact, that would be prohibited. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.
This was a presentation of the Daf Map. We hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe to be informed of our other videos. For resources and more information, please visit our website at www.thedafmap.com.